Now, first to the choice. Mueller.
We're going to be tracking some rainfall and the potential for some snowfall returning next week.
Dr. Sean Bauer. Good evening, Sean.
Yeah, Dan, USD women knocked off both Ole Miss and Baylor last weekend in the first two rounds of the NCAA tournament to punch their ticket to the Sweet 16, and they'd meet 3-seed Michigan as both teams were looking to advance to their very first Elite Eight. Coyotes and Wolverines met in Wichita, which was basically Vermilion South Saturday night in opening quarter. Coyotes leading from the get-go as Hannah Shervin catches inside and puts away two of her high 17. She also grabbed 8 boards in the game. Yotes up 2 after 1. Second quarter, Michigan looking for its first lead of the game. Emily Kaiser's 3, no good, but Naz Hillman there for the putback as the Coyotes trail for the very first time in their 3 NCAA tournament games. But USD would answer back as freshman Grace Larkins catches and connects on the second of her back-to-back 3-pointers. She had 9 points, USD up 2 at halftime. Third quarter, Wolverines in the midst of a 9-0 run as they feed Hillman inside, bucket and the foul. She led the Wolverines with 17 points in the game, but the Coyotes would close the quarter strong. Liv Korngable getting to the free throw line and knocking down the jumpers. She tallied 6 points. USD down 1 after 3. Head to the final 2 minutes. Coyotes trailing by 5. Korngable with the cross-court feed to Kaya Watson, who splashes in the 3 ball, and USD down by 2. Then under a minute to play, USD still trailing by 2. Chloe Lamb driving the lane, pulls up and gets the bucket to drop, and this game is tied at 48 apiece. But on the ensuing Michigan possession, it'll be Layla Felia coming around a screen, taking it to the rack and getting the tough shot to go, as that gave the Wolverines the 50-48 lead. USD down 3 in the final seconds, looking for the game time bucket. Kyle Watson with a look, but comes up just short, and Michigan hangs on for the 52-49 victory, and USD's historic season comes to an end in the Sweet 16.
And it took absolutely everything that we had in our tank to get to this point in time. So it was an incredible run for us, and it took a lot of preparation and toughness, and that takes years of preparation to get to this point.
You want people to remember again the type of people you are. Not only the type of basketball players you are. I'm sorry, I knew this was going to happen. And not only am I proud of Hannah and myself and our group of seniors, but our entire team, our coaches do everything they can.
So USD, with the loss, USD's season comes to an end. They finish the year with a 29-6 record and say goodbye to a very special senior class. We'll have much more with the Coyotes coming up later tomorrow on KELO News. Reporting live from Wichita, Kansas, Sean Bauer, KELO Sports.
Thank you, Sean, for your great coverage. Female veterans gathered at Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Sioux Falls today for dialogue and to highlight the importance of wellness. KELO's Renee Ortiz.
By Wednesday morning and again for Wednesday night. We're going to time that out and let you know what we could be expecting coming up in just a few minutes. Scott.
Mr. Roney, thank you very much. New tonight here on Dakota News Now. 3 people are recovering after a rollover accident in Sioux Falls. It happened just after 5:30 this evening near 57th and Southeastern. Details are limited at this time, but a witness tells us the vehicle hit the median, then rolled onto its roof. A bystander pulled a woman and 2 boys from the vehicle. Their condition is unknown. Of course, stay with Dakota News Now for updates on this story. The South Dakota DCI is leading the investigation into an officer-involved shooting in Rapid City. It happened around 1:35 this afternoon.
Met with displaced peoples and was able to experience that emotion of the and tension around this absolutely crucial moment. The reaffirmation of the multilateral order, of the importance of NATO, an organization which, let's not forget, former President Trump has described as being obsolete. All of those together were absolutely crucial. But what for me was one of the most important moments in this speech, and it was a departure from the State of the Union address just a few weeks ago, was the way in which he explained to people the importance of fighting for these democratic principles and that we had to steel ourselves for the long fight ahead. In other words, that these principles involve all of us. They are principles that are worth fighting for in a dynamic process, and things that one wakes up for every single day thinking about. Just hearing the president say that, those words, reassuring people, was absolutely crucial, Christy.
Yeah, President Biden's and his emphasis on principles and his presence speaking volumes. We got to talk about that unscripted remark he made about Vladimir Putin, saying that he cannot remain in power. It's a focus of a lot of attention today. If we assume that that was a slip, that that was an unforced error, if you will, what will the cost be?
The cost is enormous. The first of it is that it's a huge distraction, because obviously this is what everybody is talking about right now, rather than, unfortunately, talking about the substance of the speech. The problem is the way in which the Russian president can recuperate, instrumentalize, and use this as his propagandist machine. Ultimately, a threat against the Russian leader is a threat against Russia itself. And the unfortunate aspect of it is that President Putin will be able to use this to justify this conflict, this unjustifiable incursion into Ukraine. And unfortunately, it shifts away from what was otherwise a very successful, very important, and even historic trip.
Words have power. Words can impose a cost. And in light of that, let's go back to Biden's speech when he called Vladimir Putin the butcher. President Biden, had already called Putin an autocrat, a tyrant, a war criminal. Now he's calling him a butcher. How unusual is it, again, to call out a head of state in such a way, but also the impact of these words? Is this just name calling,
Yes.
or will it lead to justice?
Well, will it lead to justice? This is what the coalition and the reaffirmation of this multilateral order are absolutely remaining unambiguously committed to. The fact that this incursion will not go beyond the Ukraine into NATO territory, not by a single inch, as President Biden underscored, is absolutely crucial. The difference between the name calling and the actual invocation that there is a possibility of leadership change are two very different things. They were unfortunate statements. They've been downplayed by the State Department and by the White House, but unfortunately, they have left a shadow over this particular trip, and they are words which President Putin, of course, pays very close attention to and will unfortunately be able to instrumentalize. So I think it's crucial that the discussion and the conversation move back to the substance of the speech, to what President Biden attempted to achieve, and this remarkable coming together of European leaders who've been so distracted over the past few years because of Brexit, because of President Trump and far-right matters, that they can now focus on the business ahead, which is to defend these principles in mainland Europe.
And Biden also met with refugees. He met with Ukrainian refugees. How important is his empathy in terms of a message to the world?
Absolutely crucial. And I cannot help but think that that contact with people on the ground had an emotional, real-life impact on President Biden and can be partially used to explain the impassioned speech that he gave, the fact that he moved off the particular script. That when you think that in the country of Ukraine, 1/4 of the population has had to uproot and move. These are displaced peoples in extraordinarily difficult kind of circumstances, and to draw attention to what President Putin is doing and what the impact has been on this country that has aspirations to achieve democratic principles, to build a closer relationship to Western Europe and to the values that that geographic space represents, was absolutely crucial that President Biden was there and able to do that.
I also wanted to get your perspective on how Americans were taking in this moment for their U.S. president in Europe. To what degree were Americans listening in, hearing out to what President Biden had to say, and taking in why this fight is worth it?
I think that this trip abroad was an opportunity to bring media attention to President Biden, not just talking about it as he had done during the State of the Union address, where, of course, juxtaposing autocrats with Democrats and so on and so forth is absolutely crucial. But making that trip, being there on the ground, having the media extensively cover each and every one of those visits with the troops, going to Poland, which is of course crucial, meeting with displaced people and refugees, all of those are aiming to sensitize the public to why what is happening in Ukraine today is crucial and important to the United States. These are values that are crucial to Americans, and promoting that understanding is what a leader and an international leader must absolutely underscore on a daily basis.
Dominic, we always appreciate your insight. Dominic Thomas, thank you so much. Now, we want to take you to Lviv in western Ukraine, where a fire is raging at a fuel depot after it was hit by Russian missiles. And CNN's Phil Black is there.
It was around 4:30 local time Saturday afternoon that the war in Ukraine finally came here to the western city of Lviv. And this is the immediate aftermath. This is where there were a series of explosions heard across the city. You could see that huge black column of smoke spreading across the city. It's not just the column of smoke that is huge, the flames are really significant. And down there you can see there are fire crews desperately trying to fight them. It seems like, frankly, an insufficient effort. The hoses that you can see being targeted into those flames look very small by comparison. Those flames are still burning ferociously and look like they are set to do so for some time. What is extraordinary is that this is very much within the city limits of Lviv. It is very close to homes. It's a residential area very nearby, some high-rise, lots of houses. Just to the left, a huge shopping centre. This is clearly part of a very specific targeted campaign and tactic by the Russians, because in the last couple of days, a number of fuel depots in different locations across the country have been knocked out by their cruise missiles, often launched from naval vessels, we believe, in the Black Sea. Late last week, there was a big fuel depot near Kiev. Just today, earlier on Saturday, they announced that they'd hit another one near Mykolaiv. Now here, in far western Ukraine, in the city of Lviv, Phil Black, CNN, Lviv, western Ukraine.
Now you're watching CNN Newsroom. Is still to come how a former retail store has become a stopover, helping Ukrainians fleeing Russia's war.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine.
Wednesday, with low pressure developing out west at first, then gradually migrating to the east overnight into Wednesday. And yes, you are seeing some snow mixing into the equation as temperatures do drop toward and below freezing overnight and toward daybreak on Wednesday. That will gradually move on through. The X factor is going to be just how quickly or slowly that gets out of here Wednesday going into Thursday morning. We may be able to keep in a lesser opportunity for some rain and snow showers east river for your day on Thursday, but keep an eye out for updates on that. Beyond what we see in the sky above, we'll also keep an eye on the thermometer, which looks good at first in terms of warmer temperatures going into Monday, especially if you're west river. But take a look at what happens through the end of March and even the start of April for that matter. Near to below average conditions expected across the area. Nothing too cold, but keep in mind, average by the beginning of April, it's going to be around 50 degrees in many locations. But we have better odds at below average temperatures sticking around as we head toward the start of the new month. Lows tonight.
With my family, we're flying across the country. I can bank on the go 24/7 with ReliaBank, which is especially nice when I need to get the necessities. Game time. ReliaBank, a brighter banking experience since 1920. Member FDIC.
Bring our indoor Carl.
I use is multiple
Park. How could ASC and your work there be improved by the knowledge and perspective of VA and USDA representatives?
To cancel this election, and Lincoln said, no, we're fighting to
as hostages. Okay, on the subject of people who've been displaced and these refugees, you have been reporting for weeks from Poland about the refugees who've been crossing the border coming into Poland from Ukraine. Now you've got reports of exhausted refugees who can't take it anymore and have decided it's probably just better to go back into the war zone. How are they making that decision?
Well, it's a multitude of reasons. For one, there are some Ukrainians who were outside of their country before the war began, and some of those people are making the decision to go back into Ukraine, to go back to their hometowns or things of that nature. So that's one of them that we have seen. That's one of the reasons that's been in place. But aside from that as well, there are some Ukrainians who are going back to Ukraine to fight, and there are some who as you have mentioned, their patience has run thin with this whole process. So there's a multitude of reasons as to why people are going back to Ukraine, but they do stand to reason for that.
Yeah, just quickly, Robert, I want to play a quick soundbite from President Biden on all of those refugees he says will now be allowed to come into the United States, a full, 100,000. Take a listen to what he said.
Many Ukrainian refugees will wish to stay in Europe, closer to their homes. But we've also will welcome 100,000 Ukrainians to the United States with a focus on reuniting families.
So, Robert, has the word gotten out among the refugees where you cover, the situation there?
Yeah, we have heard that. We have, again, heard people be very appreciative that the United States is opening up their doors. Again, a lot of people here are looking for a final destination, looking for a home to wait this out or potentially longer because some fear they may not have a home to go back to. Ashley?
Yeah, that's always the worst part of all of this. That's likely, for a lot of people, unfortunately. Robert Sherman, thank you for that. Do appreciate it. Robert's reporting live for us in Warsaw. The chance of a coup against Vladimir Putin grows with every dead Russian general, with every ship destroyed, with every demoralized young Russian soldier. But don't take it from me.
I'm saying it's a show. Our plane dropped bombs on us, but it's okay. Amazing, right? It was like, good morning. It's crazy.
These young Russian soldiers, they were told they'd be greeted in Ukraine as liberators. They weren't. And the Ukrainian defenders turned out to be far more formidable than anyone imagined. But those two young disgruntled soldiers you just heard, they're the least of Vladimir Putin's worries. There is reportedly dissension in the ranks of the FSB, Russia's Federal Security Service, the modern-day version of the KGB. More and more agents are now speaking out, which is a pretty big deal in a land where critics often find themselves behind bars, or people don't find them at all. Case in point, Putin has allegedly mobilized execution squads for any of his own soldiers on the ground who try to desert. Just let that sink in. And so, 1 month into this war, if loyalty among the rank and file is bleeding out, what's happening in the inner circle? Just how safe is Vladimir Putin among his colleagues and friends, the more brutal he becomes to his own men? That's next. You've been dismissed.
You know how to play solitaire, but solitaire grand.
I thought that was a very powerful speech that he gave today.
So Emily, what struck me about the speech was 25 years ago, then Senator Biden was clear that it was Europe's responsibility to defend itself. Now he finds himself trying to walk that line between supporting Ukraine and keeping the U.S. out of the, an active war with Russia. What do you think of that approach, and does it work?
I think in general, good things happen when America leads, and that was his message on this trip. He was trying to say that we are unified as NATO, we are unified as Europeans and friends of Europe, and most importantly, we're unified as democracies. He really painted this as a struggle between the future of authoritarianism and the future of democracy, and tried to say that the democracies were going to win because, as he put it, right makes might right. He was talking about how we were in the right as democracies, and so he was flipping that phrase on its head, and I thought that was a very powerful line. In addition, the way that he spoke directly to the Polish people and used some symbology that was really important to Poland, I thought that was a quite impressive way to go about it.
Bill, the president's putting a lot of energy to Emily's point about, pressing the point to the Polish people and having that sort of rebound to the Ukrainian people. Do you anticipate a more active role for the United States as this conflict moves on?
So I think the United States is already playing a very active role. I mean, the United States has stepped up to lead this coalition. As Emily just said, it's a broad coalition. It's not just in Europe, it's around the world. It's a coalition that has put on sanctions, and the requirement for sanctions to be effective is that they are put on by a range of nations around the world. So I think the United States is leading that. It's been a major diplomatic effort. I mean, it's a diplomatic surge. General Doug Lute talks about a diplomatic surge. I've never seen a sustained, consistent, strong, broad effort on the part of diplomats to bring all the nations around. So, yeah, I think the United States has stepped up. It's probably surprised President Putin. It's probably surprised President Xi, who's undoubtedly watching this. So I think this leadership, United States leadership, is something that we're going to be proud of.
Emily, the ambassador raises an interesting point because there are some sticky parts to all of that, and it certainly is no doubt sticky with the commitment of the U.S. to hosting up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees, in addition to billions of dollars in humanitarian and food aid. How do you think that plays, and is that going to be enough, or are we looking at a possibility of, another 100,000 later on?
Oh, I think we're absolutely looking at the possibility of another 100,000 later on. I mean, if you think about just the size of Ukraine and the number of people who have already fled, I mean, Poland's already hosting upwards of 2 million refugees. Other nations on Ukraine's border are also hosting, just as many. I think there are more to come, especially following the bombings today in Lviv. You're probably going to see more people trying to get out of the country, and they probably should go. And we need to open our doors to those people. I think 100,000 is the first drop in what I'm hoping is a very big bucket, and we'll invite in many more.
So, Bill, as you know, Ukraine has loomed large in U.S. Foreign policy even before this particular invasion. That relationship that we have with Ukraine, but its role also not being a part of NATO. What's your outlook on the state of the U.S.-Ukraine relationship going forward?
So, Michael, I think that this is the right question to ask, and that is how do we interact? What is our role in Ukraine going forward? President Zelenskyy has decided, has figured out that NATO is not going to be the agency, the entity, the treaty that is going to provide his security. He thought that NATO was going to be the answer. He wants security for his people, for his country, for his nation. Not going to be NATO, he's decided, at least not now. So he's looking for other ways to secure his country. And he's looking at other models. One model, Michael, is what the Austrians have. They are not in NATO. They are in the EU. They are not a member of any defensive organization, alliance. But they need, and Ukraine needs, and this gets to your question, Ukraine needs assurances, security guarantees, that if they adopt a neutral status like Austria, that they won't be invaded again. And they've had some bad experience with this kind of an assurance before. It needs to be stronger than that. So the United States needs to think about how it can guarantee Ukraine's security going forward.
So, Emily, you know that the juicy bits aren't necessarily always in the scripted moment. The president made this apparently ad-libbed remark today. Listen.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House, of course, clarified he was not talking about regime change, but could Putin's retaliation come in the form of more Russian interference in U.S. domestic politics? What do you see happening there?
I am concerned this could be a problem. You know, I have staffed presidents and multiple senators and cabinet secretaries, and something always goes wrong. And as the staffer, you just cringe behind them and think, oh boy, I'm going to have to clean this one up. I really think that they're in cleanup mode right now. I mean, clearly this was Biden doing one of his ad libs that he occasionally does, like before the war when he talked about if it was a minor incursion. This is another one of those where he may have pulled the curtain back a little bit on what he thinks, but do I think that he was calling for regime change in Russia? Absolutely not. Do I think he was suggesting that America would somehow advocate for regime change in Russia? Absolutely not. I would expect there to be quite a bit of consternation in the Kremlin tonight, and there to be some talk of retaliation. Putin does enjoy reaching for mis and disinformation as a weapon of choice, also for cyber tools as a weapon of choice. But I mean, in a sense, we were already on high alert for those things, so I'm not sure it'll make a huge difference.
Bill, with the 30 seconds we got left, what's your reaction as if you're sitting there as the ambassador from Ukraine? What do you do?
So, Michael, this was clearly something that Joe Biden, not even president, but Joe Biden feels. He said what he believes. I don't believe it's a statement of U.S. policy. I believe it's more a moral statement. It was a statement that gets us to this point, Michael, of right and wrong. I mean, it was a moral statement that made it clear there is a black and white issue here. There's a right and wrong in this issue. So if I were in Ukraine right now, I would be pleased that he made that statement. It's very clear where the right is and where the wrong is.
Former Ambassador Bill Taylor and Emily Harding, thank you both very, very much. Coming up next, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney is here to discuss her new legislation that would stop the U.S. government from conducting business with companies operating in Russia. Stick around for that one.
It looks like we're in a screen.
As our live coverage of the war in Ukraine continues.
It's lawn season. Now I need a lawn.
Designed for your Ford.
Her parents say they just can't imagine bringing her up in the country Russia has become.
We were brought up in the country who beat the fascism, and now we are it. Where this unspeakable evil, and everyone seems to be okay with it. Not everyone, of course, but many people.
Many people, that's...
A war they describe as immoral and illegal, being waged in their name, was the final straw. Earlier this month, they got on a flight out to Istanbul.
Young people who had their hopes in the country, there was a significant part of them who really liked this, who were kind of patriotic, if you wish, that they're leaving, that they see the situation, they cannot do anything more there, that they need to move on even if they didn't want to before. To me, the heartbreaking thing is that I don't yet see the bottom, how deep it goes.
Igor is a theoretical physicist, Tanya a school teacher. They're among Russia's best and brightest, the kind of people their country can ill afford to lose.
The flight we took, it was full of people, how they say in Russian, just too clever to be in this country. You just see people and you can say that, well, this could really contribute to innovation, contribute to economy, contribute also to the just intellectual climate, the atmosphere of the society.
One Russian economist estimates that more than 200,000 Russians left the country just in the first 10 days of the war. And it's an ongoing exodus of many young, well-educated professionals, including IT specialists, journalists, and academics who've ended up in countries like Armenia, Georgia, and here in Turkey. They're escaping a brutal crackdown against those opposing Putin's war, including the threat of a 15-year jail sentence for spreading so-called fake news about the military. Others are worried about conscription and the impact of sanctions. But some feel like they just don't belong anymore. This couple in their 60s are both independent journalists. They asked us to conceal their identities for the safety of friends and family back home.
I really don't understand how I can survive there. Really, many people in Russia support this politics, and this is absolutely unbearable. They are brainwashed, I think. During Hitler's time, it was the same thing. People were brainwashed. Still, it's not all the population, and that is important maybe to speak out.
Staying and remaining silent was not an option, they say. With rumors of borders closing, they only had an hour to pack a small bag, leaving behind all they own, their memories, their life.
Deeply inside, we are patriots. We speak Russian, so our friends are Russians. We love to travel, but in any case, we are Russians. That is why it is even more complicated to make this decision. We never know if we will be able to meet all our relatives.
It's very difficult for us to restart. We are too old to restart everything anew. For young people, it's easier still. Smart people, they will find their way. For us, it will be a problem to find our place in this new world.
A world where Russians like them now feel helpless and ashamed of a country they still proudly call home. Jumana Karachi, CNN, Istanbul.
Joining us now is Konstantin Sonin. He is a professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about the economic cost on Russia so far. A wide range of economic weapons are being used against Russia. You got the sanctions, you have corporate boycotts, you have the freezing of Russia's foreign reserves, etc. What impact has all of this had on the Russian economy?
Okay, this obviously had an impact. There is the exchange rate changed dramatically. The prices are skyrocketing. There are deficit. For example, there were huge lines for sugar, and people were actually fighting in these lines. But at the same time, economic sanctions and corporate boycotts, they are not missiles, so they do not work immediately. Inflation is high. It will be high this year, but it does not. It does not affect people immediately. They will feel it within the year.
But so far, which of these economic weapons, as it were, has been the most impactful?
Well, I think the middle class obviously noted that McDonald's is the closest in Russia. McDonald's is a middle class restaurant. People noticed that some goods became unavailable. Some brands stopped their production in Russia, so there are more unemployed. These are the most visible changes.
You just mentioned corporate boycotts, and we know a flood of companies, big brands have withdrawn from Russia. You mentioned McDonald's. You know, in addition to McDonald's, you have Nestle, IKEA, Shell, the oil company, Starbucks, Apple, the tech giant, Boeing, etc. The list goes on. You can see some examples right on your screen. Is this far more than just being symbolic, virtue signaling, or is this having really big implications for Russia?
Oh, I think this is felt throughout the country because a lot of people were watching Netflix. Probably not many Russians would go to Starbucks. This is a kind of a Moscow capital feature, but everyone was watching Netflix. 70 million people used Instagram, and Instagram is now blocked because it was spreading information that the Russian government considers fake news.
Yeah, and those are inconveniences for Russian consumers. But what about the Russian oil? Russian oil is still flowing, but if the list of takers of Russian crude gets shorter and shorter and shorter, how is that going to be felt inside Russia?
Right, it's definitely became harder to sell Russian oil, and the discounts that the Russian companies have to offer, they become steeper and steeper, and they will become even more steeper when more buyers will refuse to buy Russian oil. Okay, this is not directly affecting Russian people because they're not selling oil, it's the government that sells oil, but eventually this will result in a high inflation and people will have to pay more for their food.
And as inflation rises, the economy continues to get a hit, the pain will be felt in the next few months. But would that lead to political change? Will that force Putin's hand?
Okay, generally, of course, when situation gets to the worst, it's a problem for the regime. But there is no automatic relationship between the economic hardship and the regime change. So it's actually the regime change might happen in, 5 or 10 years. So I wouldn't count on a kind of a quick reaction to the economic hardship.
And in the meantime, could the global economy get a shock from this? You know, how will the global economy be able to absorb the economic blow from Russia?
Okay, there is no question that there will be a price to be paid by all the countries in the world. Probably just China will benefit a bit from getting better deals from Russia, because Russia now is forced to make better deals for China with China. But overall, of course, the world economy will be hit, but it will not be that huge. Maybe there will be 0.5% loss of the world GDP, maybe minus 1% of GDP this year, but it's actually a small price to pay to defend peaceful citizens in Ukraine.
Konstantin Sonin, we'll have to leave it at that, but thank you very much for joining us here on the program, and take care.
Thank you.
Now, coming up right here in CNN Newsroom, North Korea, it just tested its most powerful missile in years. Can American missile defense systems thwart a potential ICBM launch from Pyongyang? Will Ripley has that story just ahead.
Hitting the road, not the usual thing you might think of. She laughs and says you're a monster sometimes. Well, stick around.
We have to do something about it. She's tall, she's Albanian, which is basically white.
Weather forecasts and sport highlights, go to DakotaNewsNow.com and stay connected. The only station with a newsroom in Pierre.
Austin Goss broke this story over the weekend,
Providing daily reports.
From the sinkholes have opened all along the roof of that cave.
And News app. Stay connected with alert notifications. Choose the alerts you want to receive. Turn off the ones you don't. Watch live broadcasts, live events, and weather updates wherever you go. Use the app to report news in your area. Know on the go. Download the KELO News app today.
Mr. Chairman, thanks to the ranking member for having this hearing. Let me follow up on
with neurologic adverse reactions, including seizure.
Your Social Security check may now be available to you in your zip code.
Keep my enemies close.
Guys, excuse
other symptoms.
He came out of the grocery store.
Sheridan has not commanded cavalry in the Western Theater. He's commanded an infantry division. But there was a saying in the Civil War.
Let's love one another.
Yeah.
Just be happy. And the
Everyone's falling in.
Coverage helpline.
Never the same after that. South Carolina top overall seed taking on Creighton Sunday, 7 Eastern. Again, all these games on ESPN and the ESPN networks. Every point of the women's tournament is. Stanford and Texas up after that. Double dip Monday, UConn, North Carolina State, Michigan, and Louisville. We just talked about it. Final Four begins Friday for who's lucky enough to get there in Minneapolis.
Still to come, one of the best stories you will see all day. Christian Eriksen back on the pitch after a terrifying
and or breastfeeding, or if you have
Spies like Anna Chapman and Maria Butina have been arrested and deported. And some experts actually believe there are more Russian spies operating in the U.S. today than there were at the height of the Cold War. And not just in D.C. either, right across the country, in your state. Just last month, President Biden kicked out 12 alleged Russian spies who were working as officials at the United Nations, the place where we're supposed to get together and hash out our differences in a friendly manner. It is always a concern when we find out that spies have secretly been living and working among us, but extra worrisome when we are on the edge of a brand new war. So how is it that these spies do what they do without getting caught? How do they blend in? And what do they do with the secrets that they steal? After the break, I'll talk to someone who knows the answers to all of those questions, because Jack Barsky was actually born Albrecht Dietrich in East Germany, where he was recruited and trained by the KGB. He was given a fake U.S. identity, stolen from an American grave, and moved to the United States to get right to work. 1978 to 1988, he posed as an American computer programmer while feeding information to the Soviets. After the break, he'll be here live to tell us what he knows about how Russian spies infiltrate America and what Vladimir Putin learned during his time in the KGB. Plus, what Comrade Putin's next moves might be for Ukraine and the rest of the world.
This is News Nation, news for California and news for all America.
Responsible for these kids the rest of their lives. And so we've had a calling to try to take care of the kids who couldn't get out or didn't get out. And I just want to thank so much for Fox. You guys have partnered with us in an unbelievable way, and everyone who's given to AbundanceInternational.org. We're now helping 20 orphanages across the country with sometimes just delivering some food, sometimes calling somebody and say, hey, can you go by and see something? Every situation's different. It changes dynamically, but our commitment is these kids don't deserve war. They deserve to have as normal a life as possible, and we are fighting every day to try to take care of and give these kids a nurturing environment.
Yeah, it is just unreal, the conditions that those children have to live in. How do you spare them from the horrors of what's going on?
This is where you really have to love what you would call the first responders, the nurses and caregivers that spend their daily life with these children 24 hours a day in shifts to just try to create a nurturing and loving environment. We're here mostly to make sure the survival needs are there, because not only is food supplies in different places hard to get, but critical medicines to find, and we have to make sure those are kept up. And we're thankful for so many of the caregivers, the nurses, the nannies that have stayed and come to work every day to give love to these kids. And a special note, something new to the families individually in the community, as some of them have taken some of these kids into their own homes, and then we're providing care packages for them to be able to additionally continue to care for these children.
Yeah, that is just amazing. And have you been able to get enough supplies? I know you described the intricate way in which you've been trying to get the supplies, but have you run short of anything, or how are you able to keep up?
That's the next phase that we're really concerned with, because some stores are out, some have some in different areas. We're having to run routes, so we're creating a network right now to be able to make those deliveries, those connections. And so many of the resource humanitarian aid made it all the way to Poland, but people didn't want to drive in. We got to create the delivery systems to bring them in. And here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, when those supplies really run low and local food stores run out, we've got to get really creative. And this is where we're all trying to partner together with people here on the ground, with you guys at Fox, your love for us and what you've done for us at Abundance International. But mostly it's going to take creativity, cooperation, everybody saying, hey, I know where something is, and let's go help this orphanage. We literally 2 days ago got a hold of an orphanage that they were not answering their phone line. We had to just knock on the door, and they came out and they had over 50 children and had no one taking care of them. We immediately ran down and bought huge truckload of food and everything to bring in there. So it's such a dynamic thing, and we can't let anyone slip through the cracks.
Yeah, Mark, real quick, we've been showing video of the beautiful faces of these children, and I know there are so many Americans who are watching right now who probably want to know how they can adopt a child. Is that possible, and how can people find out?
Currently, the legal environment is just on hold. How can you file for an adoption when that department of government is just on hold right now? But what we are doing is we have people here who are experts in it. We have an attorney who's done these adoptions. We have a family who has adopted from Ukraine and is in the process of adopting one. We're creating a network of people to say, hey, as soon as we get information, we're going to contact page at AbundanceInternational.org. Just leave with adoption in the subject line, and you'll be in the chat group with everybody else. You'll be the first to know when we can start adopting these kids out. And thank you for your heart for doing that. God bless you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for your good work and taking care of all of those innocent babies and children. You are right. They do not deserve this. No one does.
Love them so much.
Thank you, Mark. We wish you the best.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. Well, Jonathan, you know, you have so much experience covering wars around the globe. I know you have seen the children that are part of this refugee problem now, and you've been in hotspots all over the world, from Afghanistan to Israel. I wanted to just take a minute to get your thoughts on how your time in Ukraine compares to what you've seen in other places.
Yeah, just on the question of orphans there, Anita, I think it's the fate of the children and the trauma that children suffer in these wars that speaks so powerfully for all of us. It is really heartbreaking. We did a piece with some orphans when we first got here about a month ago, and seeing what they had gone through. They had sheltered for days and days in a basement with very little food and water in Kyiv. Then they got out here. They were just waiting for safety. That's all they wanted, but they were still playing, enjoying everything that they were offered by the heroes who looked after them. That's really extraordinary. And also you see the best of the world there, the best of America, for instance. There were families waiting to adopt those kids. As for this war itself, Anita, it is completely and utterly different to anything that I or any of my colleagues have covered. This is so different. When I've been in war zones before, and you were putting up a couple of pictures there, in places like Israel, we would sit with Palestinian fighters. We'd do live shots with Palestinian fighters in the background. We were not targeted at that point because the Israelis don't do that. They don't target journalists. They try not to target civilians. When we were with the American troops in Iraq or Afghanistan, they're not targeting civilians deliberately. This is an entirely different war. This is a Russian army that is absolutely prepared to lay waste to anything in its path. And if journalists get in the way, then they will target those journalists as well, as we as a Fox family so tragically saw with the death, the apparent targeting and death of our beloved colleague Pierre Zakrzewski, producer Sasha, a young Ukrainian who was working with us, and of course the injury suffered by Benjamin Hall, who is being treated for those injuries now. And we send our love obviously to him, his family, and to the families of Sasha and Pierre. Anita.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You're right, Jonathan, and thank you for that. And we can only hope that when this war does come to an end, those children in the orphanages also do become adopted by families all over the world who would love to have them. All right, when we come back, the latest updates from Ukraine. Plus, we speak to a retired Navy captain and senior fellow at the Center for National Defense to get his perspective on everything that's unfolding. Stay with us.
But the Taliban has taken this right from us.
The school closure drew international condemnation, and the U.S. called off planned talks with the Taliban. Membership in an Estonian women's paramilitary group has skyrocketed after the invasion of Ukraine, and we'll look at how they are preparing for any aggression.
The more people see of the world, the more likely they are.
Know the look. I know it well. I can tell you, every black man in America knows that look very well. What were you thinking during their questioning of her, when you would see that look come on her face?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Michael. This is a look that most black people in professional America know well. That moment where you pause and your better angels and the ancestors whisper in your ear and tell you, don't risk it all for this, and you hold back. But I will say, she was incredibly composed. That moment where she was somewhat tearful with Senator Booker was a sort of rare moment of vulnerability, and it came after what was an incredible barrage of disrespectful questions that really had no point other than to score political pot shots. So again, this is perhaps the most superlative nominee we have seen in recent years. She is eminently qualified, and what we saw were the Republicans really just acting like jerks, just being blatantly disrespectful to her, asking questions that really had no point, trying to manufacture objections so that they could not vote for her now, even though a year ago they voted for her when she was nominated to the circuit court. So a lot of political theater, but in the middle of it all, the real star who on center stage was Judge Jackson herself.
Dana, you just recited a few of the black women legal pioneers in the law, but only 5% of first-year law students are black women. And just over 3% are associates in law firms, and less than 1% are partners. What does that say about the historic nature of this nomination and what it may portend for the future?
It says volumes, to be honest, that we now have someone to show that it can be done. We now have an example of the ceilings that can be broken against all of the odds. As Melissa said, the composure, the professionalism, no notes, hours upon hours of questioning and total recall of cases, whether they were antitrust laws, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, First Amendment cases. This is a judge with an enormous command and fund of knowledge, and she makes us all proud and stands as an example to all of the black women in my circles that we also can do it. To the young girls that are just now deciding what their goals are, you can do this too. It has such historic meaning and will, for, I think, decades to come, inspire us all.
So, Melissa, to Dana's point, the 19th spoke to black women throughout the country after the hearings. One drew on her own experience as an attorney, saying, quote, "You do all the things that you're supposed to do. You go to the right schools, and still you can be treated like somebody who is an interloper and who has no right to sit in the seat that she's getting." Can you relate to what Judge Jackson went through this week?
Undoubtedly. I think Dana can relate to this as well. As black women in academia, we are often the only ones in the room. When I was the interim dean at Berkeley Law, I was the first black woman to lead a top 20 law school at that time. So we're always, I think, first, but the most important thing is that we're not last. So Dana is among the many black women deans who have been appointed in recent years. I'm in the wake of my appointment as interim dean. So this is just expanding exponentially, and Judge Jackson is only the tip of the iceberg. She is going to inspire and influence the next generation of black women lawyers, and it's going to be a phenomenal generation. She's already beginning to do this work. She talked about the letters she's received from young black girls. She's truly going to be an inspiration. And really, I think we're going to see the Ketanji effect going forward in the legal profession.
So Dana, listen for a moment to what Judge Jackson said about being a role model. Take a listen.
One of the things that having diverse members of the court does is it provides for the opportunity for role models. Since I was nominated to this position, I have received so many notes and letters and photos from little girls around the country who tell me that they are so excited for this opportunity and that they have thought about the law in new ways because I am a woman, because I am a black woman.
How do you react to that? How do you process that?
I'm proud. I'm excited. I'm moved. She inspires me. Today I met with a group called the Coalition of 100 Black Women, and we were talking about topics completely apart, but we could not help ourselves but to celebrate for a few moments the accomplishments and the achievements of us all. And you know why? Again, it's because we are aware that this is an example of the kind of talent, the kind of qualifications, the kind of expertise that has been overlooked for centuries. She is not the first that is qualified. She is not the first that could break these barriers. She's been the first that has been allowed to. And I like what Melissa said. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Melissa Murray and Dana Bowen-Matthew, thank you both. Really, really appreciate it. Next, could the wife of a Supreme Court justice be the next witness subpoenaed by the January 6th committee?
Does daily stress leave you feeling out of sync? New Dove Men's Stress Relief Balm.
Protect, then I think every single one of those people
And every bit of that decision will have been the most obscene moment in all of Hollywood history. And I hope that's not what's happening. If it turns out to be what's happening, I would encourage everyone involved to know that though it may be their moment, and I understand that, to celebrate their films, it is so much more importantly their moment to shine and to protest and to boycott that Academy Awards. And I myself, if it comes back to it, when I return, I will smelt mine in public. I pray that's not what's happened. I pray there have not been arrogant people who consider themselves representatives of the greater good in my industry that have not decided to check in with leadership in Ukraine. So I'm just going to hope that that's not what's happened, and I hope that everybody walks out if it is.
Penn has been filming a documentary about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He called President Zelensky an extraordinary and courageous person. Thank you for watching. I'm Christy Lustow, and our coverage live from Lviv, Ukraine is next.
I've traveled every analytics third way, and Abbott, who provided the test kits so that we can all feel safe and sound as we collect together. So thank you all for your support.
Millions of ways to make the most of your land.
You'll love on Wayfair.
It's for just $297. Plus, we'll add a portable charging case and ship your order.
PBS Video app.
Tiny in the ear.
Settle for the perimeter shot. They attacked the paint. They had over 46 points in the paint in this game. They dominated that area. Mark Williams impacted the game and was the best player on the floor, 5 feet and in, at both ends of the court. It's the hut.
The overtime went into overtime.
Other players to drive and attack. AJ Griffin was sensational. Paolo Banchero was sensational. This was a team that, as we talked going into the tournament, they had the most pressure on them of any team, because not only were they playing to try to win a national championship, they were playing to prolong the coaching career of the legendary Coach K. They've done it. They're going to New Orleans.
150,000 people with non-valvular AFib have left blood thinners behind.
Not missing out. It's simple. One, call the number on your...
The whole process was so positive for us.
Excellent service.
Getting right to the point, hiring.
The bird is
information out there, and it's really hard to know what you can believe, which is why I think people turn to us again and again.
It's public media's role to try to help educate and enlighten.
PBS continues to be one of the most trusted institutions in the country.
We really do go out and meet the moment as it's happening.
We are there at the front lines asking tough questions and getting important and robust answers.
We're playing a major role in combating lies, fake news.
As journalists, we are trying to bring the most fair coverage that we possibly can.
It's about digging deeper and talking to the powerful and especially to the powerless.
Public media is the place where you cut through all the noise.
We move forward by staying true to our values. And on PBS, news is human.
For more than 30 years, Ken Burns has been telling America's stories. For the first time, you can stream the Ken Burns collection with PBS Passport. From intimate portraits of exceptional Americans to the epic sweep of a nation at war. From our pastime to our music, our darkest hours to our national treasures. More than 24 films, the Ken Burns collection. Stream now with PBS Passport.
Sunday on PBS, starting with Call the Midwife.
Everything all right, Miss Higgins?
I was burgled last night.
Then Sanditon on...
Today, Russia has strangled democracy.
President Biden unleashing harsh words directed towards Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. It is Vladimir Putin who is to blame. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
He spent the day with Ukrainian refugees at the Polish border, and now he's heading back to the White House. Hannah Brandt will break down the president's big speech and his high-stakes meetings with NATO leaders. Pounding Ukraine. New Russian strikes today throughout the country. The city of Lviv being pummeled. Loud explosions, massive flames, and dark clouds of smoke covering the city. Robert Sherman is on standby in Poland. Searching for answers. Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins is dead at 50. Investigators trying to figure out how he died. Tonight, a look at the tributes from the entertainment world. COVID's fourth shot. The Biden administration plans to offer more booster shots as experts worry about another wave of COVID infections. Evan Lambert is live in Washington, D.C. He'll tell us when the FDA could approve the second set of boosters. The belle of the ball, St. Peter's University stuns the college basketball world again by advancing to the Elite Eight. More teams are clashing in March Madness. One of the favorites, the Duke Blue Devils, lacing up their shoes to stay alive in the tournament. Tonight, we look at the hype surrounding Coach K's last hurrah.
Live from News Nation headquarters, this is News Nation Prime.
An all-out assault. Russian forces continued to push Ukraine to the limit. Today, Lviv was rocked by powerful missile attacks, explosions shaking the city, and plumes of thick black smoke rising in the distance. Today's onslaught came during President Biden's visit to Poland. Before he left to head back to the White House, the president spent the day visiting refugee camps along the Poland-Ukraine border. He spoke candidly during his speech in Warsaw.
We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay.
And this is a look at the areas that are under Russia's control. This invasion bringing a mix of expected and unexpected developments, leaving little room for confidence about what will happen next. News Nation's Robert Sherman joins us live now from Poland with more on the fierce clashes. And Robert, what else are we learning about today's strikes?
Well, it is very clear, Ruta Bay, that the targets in Lviv were strategic targets relating to infrastructure. One thing is clear, though. Russian strikes are moving farther and farther to the west.
For over a month, Russian forces have hammered cities across Ukraine with bombings and airstrikes. An explosion was heard today in Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv, along with more air raid sirens. But out west, Ukrainians are on high alert. The city of Lviv facing new attacks today. The governor of the region reported 3 powerful explosions. Multiple missile strikes in Lviv left 5 people injured. This photo, posted by the mayor of the city, shows the windows of a school blown out by the shockwaves of bombs. And now there's new cause for concern for the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv. The city is now surrounded, and the suffering of residents who haven't been able to escape is intensifying. Those residents now fear Chernihiv could suffer the same fate as besieged Mariupol in the south. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy making a surprise video appearance today at Qatar's Doha Forum, stating that because Ukraine cannot export due to the war, the world will suffer the consequences.
The absence of exports from Ukraine will deal a severe blow to many countries worldwide, to the Muslim world, to Latin America and other countries worldwide.
Zelenskyy again called on Russia to negotiate an end to the war, but he said Ukraine would not agree to give up any of its territory for the sake of peace. The issue of energy top of mind, as many Western nations pledged to not buy oil from Russia. Zelenskyy today calling on the country to increase its output of energy.
The future of Europe rests with your efforts. It depends on your efforts. I ask you to increase the output of energy to ensure that everyone in Russia understands that no country can use energy as a weapon and to blackmail the world.
So 2.2 million Ukrainians have fled their country to Poland to seek safety. Local officials here, though, say if the city of Lviv in western Ukraine, which has been a haven for refugees, continues to get bombed, the refugee numbers they're seeing here will skyrocket. Rudabeh?
Robert, thank you. And President Biden wrapped up his 4-day trip to Europe with a speech at Warsaw's Royal Castle. He called on NATO countries to stand together in the face of Russian aggression. The speech was capped by the president saying, quote, Putin cannot remain in power. NewsNation Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt is live in the nation's capital tonight. And Hannah, what does this mean?
Yeah, Rudabeh. Well, after days of meeting with world leaders and refugees, President Biden ended his trip with a message of unity and confidence, even in the face of intensifying attacks on Ukraine.
They're so big.
On the final day of his trip to Europe, President Biden met with Ukrainian refugees in Poland.
I'm always surprised by it. Is the depth and strength of the human spirit.
And had this to say about Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He's a butcher.
Hours before his speech in Poland, Russian missiles struck the city of Lviv, just a few dozen miles away from the Polish border. But President Biden still expressed optimism.
Rather than breaking Ukrainian resolve, Russia's brutal tactics have strengthened the resolve.
After days of meeting with NATO allies, the president said the alliance remains united and must continue to punish Russia and support Ukraine.
We must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after.
This week, the president announced plans to accept 100,000 Ukrainian refugees into the U.S. and to send $1 billion in humanitarian aid.
We stand with you, period.
While he reiterated that American troops will not go into Ukraine, he had a warning for Russian forces.
Don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory.
And he also had a message for the Russian people.
You, the Russian people, are not our enemy.
President Biden finished his speech with this remark about President Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
And the White House quickly sent out a clarification saying that the president was not calling for a regime change, instead saying that he meant that President Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over the region. Rudabeh, back to you.
Hannah, thank you. And here now to break down what came of the NATO summit during the president's 4-day trip to Europe is retired U.S. Ambassador to Georgia and current ambassador in residence at Northwestern University, Ian Kelly.
Own staff. This is the biggest after what I thought was a very good speech. Listen.
We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
I agree, but his staff didn't. Who was right? President Biden for ad-libbing that line, apparently, or for his staff for walking it back?
Well, Brian, what definitely wasn't right is to have the combination of the two. President Biden seemed to ad-lib there. He said something that Vladimir Putin will now use as for his own reasons to say, see, I told you all along that the United States and NATO wants to attack Russia, wants to topple our government. Yet then his staff immediately turned around and walked it back. So you get the worst of all possible worlds. Unfortunately, this is fairly common with Joe Biden, is that he makes these statements, they have an effect in the world, then the staff immediately walks them back, and that has an effect in the world as well. It is not reassuring for our safety or to our allies.
Senator, it's been a long time since I remember Democratic senators as focused as you are in agreement like you are, and many of you like Lindsey Graham are, that we need to help out Ukraine more. But I think we have to credit President Zelensky for that. He has talked past the leaders to the parliament who represent the people. That is why, in a latest Fox poll, over 60% of the country thinks we're not doing enough. How much credit does Zelensky deserve? Am I overstating it?
Not at all, Brian. I would add, in addition to President Zelensky, it's the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people who deserve this credit. In no small part, they shamed the Western world into supporting them after the first 4 or 5 days of this war, Brian. You recall when President Putin gave that speech about Donetsk and Luhansk province on President's Day, we actually slapped sanctions on those provinces, on Ukraine, not on Russia. 2 days later, when he invaded, they were very weak, very milquetoast steps. And that's because Joe Biden and most Western leaders thought that Kyiv and the Ukrainian government would fall in a matter of days. When they didn't, when they held out fighting through that first weekend, when President Zelensky kept posting all those videos, it really did shame Western leaders into taking the actions that we should have been taking months ago, sending Ukraine Javelin missiles and other anti-tank missiles, Stinger aircraft missiles. We're still not doing everything we could do. We still could be sending them those S-300 systems to protect their airspace, for instance, or Harpoon anti-ship missiles, coastal batteries that could destroy Russian ships just like they did the other day with one ballistic missile. These things should have been happening months ago, but it was really the bravery and the skill of the Ukrainian army and the leadership of President Zelensky that forced the hand of Western leaders, to include Joe Biden, to finally do what we should have done months ago.
And if you want to stop this horrible regime from spreading that Russian culture, not what their traditions are, but what their government is, stop them in Ukraine. It'll save the Baltics. It'll save Poland, save the surrounding area, and a big headache. And if they take troops out of Georgia to help out in the Ukraine, Georgia should go take back those provinces they lost in 2008. Senator, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, always great. Meanwhile, Russian rockets pummeling Lviv today, a city that has become a haven for nearly 200,000 people, including a lot of press, who have had to flee their homes in case of the Ukrainian people and go to safety. Alex Hogan is live in the western Ukrainian city with the latest. Alex.
Hi, Brian. These strikes that took place here in Lviv were the closest to the city center that we have seen to date since Russia's invasion. People ran for cover initially when the air raids went off around 4 p.m. local time. You can see that in this video that we're showing you now. The mayor initially telling everyone to run for cover and to stay there for the foreseeable future, expecting future attacks, which did take place. The black billowing smoke blanketing Lviv's skyline, and the mayor says the attack struck an oil facility and a factory, both linked to the military. Now, this comes on the heels of what is believed to be a possible shift in strategy here. Just yesterday, a senior official, a defense official, suggested that Russia's shifting its efforts to more focus on eastern Ukraine. But tonight, the mayor of Lviv argued that everywhere really is a target at this point, and he is calling for more support, saying, quote, "The sooner we get quality weapons and anti-missile systems, the safer our cities and our residents will be." Now, further to the north in Kyiv, the country's capital, it was the scene of intense shelling today. People walked through the area trying to salvage what they could of the rubble, trying to find any lost belongings, what little they could in the burnt remains of their homes.
There is no house anymore. It was bombed. 3 families used to live here. I can't say anything anymore.
There were 1 or 2 story buildings. It's clear that there was nothing or no one here, no weapons at all. They have destroyed everything.
Now, Mariupol is still one of the towns and cities facing the brunt of the attacks, with continued shelling, bombings. People there are running out of food, they are running out of water, and frankly, they're running out of space, with residents now they're being forced to create makeshift graves to bury their loved ones. Brian.
Alex, thanks so much. From all the refugees you've been dealing with, now you're dealing right into the eye of the storm of the fight. Meanwhile, General Jack Keane joins me now with a live look at what's happening on the ground. General, great to see you. First off, with the president's speech and his trip, has he made gains for NATO, for us, for the Ukrainians?
Well, I thought it was one of his better speeches. It was powerfully delivered and certainly very dramatic there in Poland. If I had one criticism of it, other than the flub, is I would have liked to see him focus actually more on Ukraine. I understand he was in Poland. He's talking about defending NATO. And also, I totally agree with you and Senator Cotton. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, ever since the Ukrainians have done so well, that the objective is winning. It's not just helping Ukrainians, it's actually winning. But the best deterrence against Russia attacking NATO is actually happening inside of Ukraine. Ukraine is crushing the Russian army and splintering it rather seriously and making it incapable of conducting an attack on NATO. And clearly that is a point that President Biden should be making over and over again.
And he doesn't. So let's go to this. Alex Hogan is reporting what the Russians were saying yesterday. They now have, their goal is just to take this area here and maybe bring dialing back what they originally wanted to do, and that is take the whole country, starting with the capital. You're not buying that. Why?
That's a false report released by the Russian official. And the reason is that they're a month into the campaign, and they're trying to say that they've accomplished what they set out to do, which was the Donbass region and the bridge, the land bridge to Crimea. But that wasn't their main effort. That's not what they set out to do. What they set out to do was topple the entire country and take the capital city. And they haven't moved any forces into the Donbass region from any other place, indicating it has a priority over the other areas. Actually, its forces still moving into Belarus, and likely those forces are going to be used to attempt to take Kyiv, the capital city. This is just a cover for the fact that they have failure.
General, I just want to point to the fact that they have not taken everything. See, if you look at the capital right here, there's still blasting going on, and there's still some movement in the suburbs. You're saying some more troops are coming out of Belarus, and here is what was hit today. And we cannot forget something else that's happened today. Kherson, which was the first city to fall and the only city to thoroughly fall, they're now pushing the Russians out, which is very encouraging. And Mariupol, the Chechens are announcing that they've taken over the capital, and Mariupol could, in fact, fall. Your comment on those three things?
Well, clearly, Kyiv still has the priority. You saw the video there. Those are on the outskirts of the city where that shelling is taking place. They have not been able to move their artillery down and encircle the city, and so it would clearly be able to destroy that city is what they have in mind before they move their combat troops in.
Right.
And it's not surprising that they finally started to attack Lviv. And they know full well that Lviv has grown in size 2 or 3 times its size because there's so many people there from other parts of Ukraine. And eventually, I think there'll be increased bombardment of that area. In the Kharkiv area, which you didn't mention on your map there, right there, yeah. There's been a counterattack there in the last 24 hours. They've taken back 2 towns in that area. And also in the Donbass region, down in the east, the southeast there, the Russians tried to take 2 towns and failed at doing it. But pretty much the same as we were the day before, stalemated activity, tactical moves on both sides being done.
General, thanks so much. Great perspective. This will be a big week. Just give the Ukrainians the material they need to win. They'll do the hard stuff. General Jack Keane, thanks so much. All right, straight ahead. President Biden ripped back by oil and gas executives. Tim Stewart will be live to put that in perspective on One Nation. And coming up, News Tool with Impractical Joker, the real star of that show, Murr.
That's 1-800-978-2443 or go to SpotlightExtreme.com.
Answer only. If it's
This is Chelsea. A broad range of commodities. In addition to
They spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing.
And don't receive if the treatment.
In the foyer was a clear foot impression, which was
more education to do.
Absolutely.
And right now, it's paying dividends.
Did you get his number? Oh, Grandma. Grandma! Excuse me.
Ron Updike, Independent News Service.
Sunday night, partly cloudy skies, low 27.
Will land Monday evening, but they're going to be mainly light and scattered. The better chance for moisture comes in West River at first on Tuesday afternoon, then overnight Tuesday into Wednesday it migrates East River. Now, how long this sticks around? Well, that depends on how quickly that area of low pressure gets on out of here.
The region is a great place to live, work, play, have a family, and having those opportunities.
Very Brighton.
They want to know if it's got weight,
They do.
if it's got heft.
I like to cook simple. My sauce is cooked simple.
to javelins rings a bell, it's because those exact weapons were the center of Trump's first impeachment trial. See, back in 2019, he tried to leverage those same Javelin anti-tank weapons over Ukraine in exchange for a made-up scandal about Joe Biden's son. Y'all remember that. Chris, Jen, and Eugene are still with us. So, Chris, Trump's big plan for countering Russia's invasion would be to threaten to drop a nuclear bomb on Russia. Okay, so it seems kind of obvious, but it's Saturday night. So can you explain why that's a terrible idea?
Well, I don't think anyone wants a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. We've certainly heard a lot of nuclear threats from President Putin the past couple of weeks, who's put his nuclear forces on high alert and threatened to escalate if Russia feels threatened in a conflict. I think it's definitely fair to say that the U.S. ought to be pushing back more aggressively against Putin's nuclear threats, reminding the Russians that, of course, the U.S. has a comparable arsenal and that Russia shouldn't think about using any type of nuclear forces, whether in Ukraine or anywhere else in the world. It's dangerous rhetoric from the Russians, and I think they ought to be put back in their place and reminded that they're not the only country with a substantial nuclear force.
So, Jen, this isn't the first time the former President Trump has hinted about a secret plan. In 2016, if you recall, he said he had a secret plan to defeat ISIS, but it never really was revealed or materialized. So who believes this stuff anymore? I mean, what's the point of all of this?
This is just his natural self-aggrandizement and just red meat for the base. I want to just remind your viewers, Donald Trump tried to extort President Zelensky, the same guy who is now an international hero. Donald Trump was strong-arming him, denying him weapons so that, as you said, he could kick up some kind of dirt on now President Biden. Every Republican who went along with that, every Republican who voted to acquit him and Trump have a moral stain, and they contributed to a sense that Putin had, that America was not really all that enamored of NATO, that they weren't going to stand with them, that he could waltz into Ukraine and somehow separate them from their European allies. So just a little bit of history there. As far as Putin goes, he and Trump were joined at the hip. Let's not forget that Trump was really the best propaganda minister that the Russians have had in many, many years. He provided all kinds of justifications for everything from their seizure of Crimea all the way back to their invasion of Afghanistan. So this is just a lot of memory holding and an attempt to whitewash history. But I think it's important for all of us to remember what he did and what Republicans did to, frankly, alienate and isolate Ukraine at a time just as it is now, that they badly needed our unwavering support.
So, Eugene, speaking of history, watching President Biden with NATO leaders this week, I really could not help but think about Trump's visit to NATO in 2017. Now, if you recall, he shoved the Prime Minister of Montenegro out of the way on camera. Now, the question is, how do you think our NATO allies are viewing this moment that Trump's not there? He's not the one in charge during this particular war.
One of the things that leaders of countries really like America to have is kind of stable rhetoric, to have a president who is consistent in the things that he says, and most importantly, a president who likes NATO, right? And Donald Trump spent years talking about talking down to NATO countries, saying that they weren't doing enough, talking about and threatening to pull the United States out of NATO. And so they are more at home with Biden. You can look at the way that they're talking with him at trips earlier this year, despite some of the kerfuffles they've had over the time period at the beginning of last year when he was with Emmanuel Macron, when he was talking with some of these other leaders. There's more of a comfort there, and that's very obvious because of the way that Donald Trump has talked about NATO in the past, and frankly how he continues to talk about NATO. And to add to Jennifer's history lesson there, in 2014, when Putin took Crimea, part of Ukraine, what used to be part of Ukraine, Trump praised him right? And continue to praise him at CPAC, continue to praise him in 2016 for the same thing. And so that is something that when leaders of NATO countries look at how President Biden has handled what's been going on, how he's brought them together, and whether politicians here in the United States like that idea that they're praising him, that is what they're doing. They're talking about how he helped to build this coalition together, to have countries do things that they hadn't done before, including giving weapons to Ukraine, something that like Germany, for example, had not really wanted to do, and how they think Trump would have handled it, right? Talking about his secret plans and those plans being kind of dangerous and would up the ante for sure if he were president, those things were to happen.
Christopher Miller, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you being with us. And Jen and Eugene, stick with us. We've got a lot coming up. Next, should Clarence Thomas rescue himself from January 6th related cases? Now that we know his wife wanted to overturn the 2020 election? Well, we'll talk about that and more with our panel next.
When my teeth started to deteriorate, I stopped hanging out socially. It was an easy decision, clear choice.
The health of our teeth plays a significant role in our overall health. Chantal was suffering, and we had to put an end to that. The absolute best way to do that was through dental implants.
Clear Choice dental implants changed everything. My digestive health is much better now. I feel more energetic. The person that I've always been has shown up to the party again.
You could satisfy it by getting crypto the same way everyone else does.
Full fixture LED light that's wireless, solar powered, and
boom. What about the whole high school thing? How old are you again?
Inflation is things that happen, as I mentioned in my speech, that both that demand was strong, but also that it
and other people. It's been an interesting time over the last several years of working through some pretty emotionally charged items. But again, you continue to just grow so much as a person. And so if anyone is looking at running, reach out. I love to have those conversations. I don't care where you land politically. I love to have those conversations just to say, is this the right time for you? Do you have the time and the heart to do this? Because it is time consuming, and so you really have to give it your all. And so don't be afraid.
Cool.
Oh my gosh.
In addition, we also asked our consumers, what do you like? What is it most about wines?
From President Biden. This was a highly anticipated visit. Some of the people we spoke with here say that it was a little late because many expected him to make a visit out here a couple of weeks ago. Still, many continue to look towards the West and towards the United States as to exactly how this crisis is going to be navigated, both on the humanitarian front and when it comes to the war in Ukraine. That's what a lot of people wanted to hear from the president today, to get a little bit more strategy and to get a little bit better idea of what action is going to be taken. Rudabeh?
And Robert, what do all the people on the ground there think about President Biden being in town this weekend?
Well, it was highly anticipated, and people were looking towards the president to come here. I think a lot of people expected that after that trip was announced to Brussels, that this was going to happen shortly thereafter. A lot of people here are looking for action from the West, though. Listen to this one, gentlemen.
It would be good to send out peacemakers of NATO peacemakers to Ukraine, and I think, well, his voice, if he says that we should do it as NATO, as a whole organization, that would be a very strong message to the world.
So that one gentleman liked the idea of NATO peacekeepers. The two lines that we continue to see walked here that most everyone seems to agree with: one, whatever action is taken regarding Ukraine, they want it to be unified among NATO members, and second, they want it to be decisive. Rudabeh?
And Robert, Poland, as you've been reporting, has been the main stop for Ukrainians in need. What kind of help would the Polish citizens like to see from the U.S. in that regard?
Well, one thing that some of the local officials here told us is that they would like some of the aid that's coming from NATO and the West to go directly to the NGOs, directly to the refugees themselves, as opposed to going to the government here, because they said that that ends up allowing the resources and the aid to get directly to people. But the main emphasis is that a lot of Polish citizens believe that they're doing what they must in order to take in as many of these refugees, but they feel as though that they need help and that they can't do all this alone. I mean, you listen to those numbers. 2.2 million refugees have come here to Poland as a whole. The mayor told us that the population of his city has grown 20% in the last 3 weeks. That's a lot for any city to bear single-handedly.
Wow, no doubt about that, and in such a short amount of time, too. Robert, thank you. And refugees from Ukraine are headed here to America. The Biden administration will allow up to 100,000 of them into the U.S. I spoke with Melanie Nazaire from HIAS. That's an organization focused on resettling refugees. And she gave us her response to President Biden's announcement.
The announcement was very encouraging. If you think about it, it's despite the lack of details and the lack of a real plan for all the different mechanisms for bringing people here, which we know will come, it's a real strong articulation of a vision of where the U.S. wants to be as a humanitarian leader in this crisis. In addition to accepting refugees, the president has said we will be contributing a large amount of humanitarian aid and assistance, both to refugees in Europe and also to people who've been displaced in Ukraine. And so, the announcement was really most welcome.
Yeah, but we talk about those logistics, right, and the mechanisms. Give us a better understanding of how these legal pathways work. What options do refugees have, and will those with family already here in the U.S. be considered first?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that most refugees will likely remain in the region. When it comes to refugee crises, there's something called durable solutions. There's really three options for refugees, right? They either can go home, and unfortunately, most refugees can't do that quickly given the state of the world. Most conflicts go on for years and decades. Hopefully, that won't be the case in this one. There's also local integration, and that's really where the bulk of refugees find themselves. They're in neighboring countries and need to figure out how to start their lives in the countries that they are in. And then the third is resettlement. So for people who really can't do either one, they can't return home and they can't locally integrate for a variety of reasons. Either it's because something about themselves that they can't, their society can't accept them, there are too many refugees, or it's something particular, or because there's just too many. So that's the second one. And so the third one is resettlement. So other countries who are not in the area of the conflict will step in and say, look, you know, we will share the responsibility with the hosting countries and bring some people to our country. And that's what we're talking about doing with resettlement. And there are many ways to do this. One way is through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. This is a program that's been in operation for over 40 years. But of course, the U.S. has been welcoming refugees for much longer than that. And the Refugee Resettlement Program gives people a path to permanent residency here. And that's what we're urging the administration to do. For people who have lost so much control over their lives, to give them an option if they are here to either stay here or go home when it's safe. That's what we think is the right approach. There are many ways to do this. Humanitarian parole is one option. The United States offered humanitarian parole to Afghans who came in over the summer during the evacuation. But note that those people don't have a path to permanent status, and that has caused a lot of problems in terms of trying to figure out how to make sure they have the option to stay here longer term. So we would urge the administration to offer some kind of permanent status or path to permanent status for people who come. And you note families, if you were in the situation of the woman that was on the previous segment, or somebody who had left their family behind, and you had a brother in the United States, or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle who wanted to welcome you, that's where you'd want to be. So we think keeping families together in this crisis is critical.
And you talk about the Afghans, right? How does this crisis fit into the global makeup of refugees trying to come into the U.S.? Because we did see, a disparity in Afghan refugees, for example.
I mean, there's a huge disparity. Let's be honest. We're in the largest refugee crisis before this one since World War II, before the Ukraine crisis. So this just adds to the magnitude of the crisis. And let's be honest, also, the world hasn't been quite so welcoming. This has been an amazing outpouring of support, and it's beautiful to see. We've gotten at highest thousands of calls from people who want to help host refugees, send money overseas, send products overseas, volunteer. We think that that's how the world should respond to all refugees.
And here's a look at some other national headlines. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry will resign from office following his conviction for lying to federal authorities. The Nebraska Republican says his resignation takes effect Thursday. Fortenberry was convicted in California this past week of lying to the FBI about an illegal campaign donation. A jury has ordered the city of Denver to pay $14 million in damages for violating the rights of protesters during the 2020 demonstrations over the killing of George Floyd. Jurors deliberated for 4 hours yesterday before concluding that police used excessive force against the demonstrators. One of the plaintiffs says she's relieved by the outcome.
It's incredibly validating to have my neighbors, folks from across Colorado, come together, listen to for 3 weeks what we've lived for 2 years, and come back pretty quickly with the right answer and the right verdict.
During the trial, lawyers for the city admitted mistakes were made during the protests. Several Denver police say 5 officers were disciplined and 1 fired for their actions. For the first time in 2 years, Hawaii has no indoor mask mandate. The state first enacted the mask rule back in April of 2020. Masks are still required in public schools, prisons and jails, and airports. Public transportation will continue to require mask use until April 18th. Businesses may also require masks. New York City officials are planning to remove makeshift homeless encampments on city streets. Mayor Eric Adams tells the New York Times he expects the clearing out to begin in the next couple of weeks. The mayor did not say where the people living in those encampments would go. In the most recent estimate from January of 2021, New York City said about 1,100 people were living on the streets, but that's actually considered an undercount by homeless advocates. Also in New York City, Uber has announced plans to start listing all city taxis through its app. While it will mean more customers for struggling yellow cab drivers, it's unclear how much they'll make and if it will be enough to cover overhead expenses. NewsNation's Jennifer Biesram reports who spoke with some drivers who say being able to hail a cab using the Uber app will help, but may not be worth it.
New Yorkers will soon be able to
for everyone.
That's right, my generation. Yeah, all about a good time.
During Judge Jackson's Supreme Court hearings next.
And that's why, again, couldn't agree more with people who spoke on the show, Senator Cotton and others. This is a time for America to lead the world, not from behind, but to lead the world and declare that the goal of this war for Ukrainians to win, because that's the first step to topple Putin's dictatorship. We can do the rest in Russia, but it's very important to remember that is what actually President Biden said. I think it's his instincts. He was right, but then unfortunately was backtracked by the White House and other officials. So that should become a sort of a strategy for the free world. And uniquely, Europeans don't have to be pushed. It's just, who could have imagined that Europe and Germany especially...
You can't believe it.
No, could you believe that now Germany is actually, it's ahead of America in pushing for the sanctions?
And if we could get them off Russian oil and gas, we'd devastate if they're their economy and give them the freedom. They never should have done it.
Exactly, but
Final thought, real quick.
Yeah, but it's not actually such oil and gas, you know. You cannot have any ambiguity on sanctions. It should be made very clear that sanctions will stay as long as Russia remains aggressive and a danger for her neighbors.
We talk about the economy next, inflation, how it affects you. Don't move. Brian Kilmeade.
It's time to start your own business, to turn your dream into something official. LegalZoom has helped launch and support new
when you step into
the streets of Kabul to protest on Saturday, just days after the Taliban in Afghanistan reneged on a promise and made education for many young women difficult, if not impossible. The demonstrators chanted against the Taliban's decision to keep girls above 6th grade out of school. It's supposedly until Sharia-appropriate school uniforms are designed, But demonstrators, they were not buying that.
Unfortunately, by the advent of the Taliban, all our schools were closed. We girls are allowed to study same like boys. Islam has given us this right, but the Taliban has taken this right from us.
The move quickly drew international condemnation, and the U.S. canceled planned meetings with the Taliban. Paula Newton has more on the growing outrage.
The Taliban decision to bar Afghan girls above 6th grade from returning to school has triggered a concrete backlash. American officials say Wednesday's decision could be a potential turning point in engagement as they canceled planned meetings with the Taliban in Doha.
The decision by the Taliban, if it is not swiftly reversed, will profoundly harm the Afghan people, the country's prospects for economic growth, and the Taliban's ambition to improve their relations with the international community.
For the first time in more than 7 months, Afghan schools reopened Wednesday for a much-anticipated return. But it was a day that ended in heartbreak, tears, and anger for many. After the Taliban announced girls above 6th grade must stay home. That decision came just hours after schools had reopened, many eager female students arriving back only to find they wouldn't be let inside.
Why are they playing with our future? We have rights. We are humans from this country. We want to be free. We just want to continue our education. Is it a sin that we are girls?
A Taliban news agency said the delay is so uniforms can be designed according to Sharia and Afghan customs. But the decision is viewed by many as an excuse, as condemnation rings out across the globe.
This is of grave concern at a time when the country desperately needs to overcome multiple intersecting crises.
No country can grow by excluding women and girls from education. I mean, the fact that we still have to say this in the 21st century.
In recent months, the Taliban have repeatedly insisted they would not go back to how things were in the late 90s and early 2000s, when women and girls were banned from working or going to school. It has been 7 months since this now iconic scene of thousands stranded at the airport in Kabul, desperately trying to leave after the Taliban's takeover. Now, those left behind seeing human rights withering away, among them the tearful schoolgirls whose hopes of an education are now shattered. Paula Newton, CNN.
Older adults in the United States may soon have the option of getting a second COVID-19 booster shot. The Food and Drug Administration is expected to authorize a 4th dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for those older than 50. That decision is expected as early as next week. And soon after that, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is expected to follow suit with a similar recommendation. The U.S. is limiting the use of a particular COVID treatment due to a more contagious subvariant. The Food and Drug Administration says that the monoclonal antibody treatment called sotrovimab has been successful keeping people out of the hospital, but it does not seem to help people who contracted the Omicron subvariant known as BA2. The FDA says that BA2 is now the dominant strain in at least 8 states, 2 territories, and it's rising elsewhere. It's also driving a surge in cases in parts of Europe, particularly the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands. And joining us now is Anne Remoyne. She is a professor in the epidemiology department at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, and she joins us now live from Los Angeles. Professor, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about BA2 and what we know about the new Omicron subvariant. It's apparently more transmissible than BA1, but does it cause more severe illness?
Well, thanks for having me, Christy. And this is a good question. So BA2 appears to be more transmissible, maybe even 50 to 60% more transmissible, but it does not appear to cause more severe disease. So that's good news.
Very good news. And look, we know that cases caused by BA2 remain relatively high, relatively speaking, across Asia. There's also this new wave of BA2 infections happening across Europe. And we're starting to see a rise in BA2 cases in the U.S. Is this going to be another surge in the U.S.?
Well, we don't really know. What we're starting to see here in the United States and in North America in general is an uptick in wastewater surveillance. So we're starting to detect it in greater and greater quantities here. It's now becoming the dominant variant here. We've started to see in New York City, for example, an uptick in cases and in certain parts of the United States. But it's really unclear what kind of an increase we're going to see. Are we going to see a surge as we saw before? Are we just going to see a smaller wave? It really depends upon the kind of immunity that we have here. But interestingly, what we're seeing in the UK, where they did also have a very large Omicron surge, they do have a very high rate of cases. Hospitalizations are starting to increase there as well. So we need to be watching these indicators very closely and be ready to act if we start to see a large increase.
Yeah, and that action could also take the form of an additional booster shots. In the U.S., the FDA is set to approve additional booster shots for adults over the age of 50 next week. I'm already boosted here in Hong Kong. My folks in America already boosted. But will we all need another booster shot?
Well, sooner or later, we're all going to need another booster shot. I think it's pretty clear that the immunity that we get from the vaccine in terms of preventing infection is waning, although it is still doing a good job at preventing severe disease, hospitalization, and death in most people. Now, immunocompromised people need to be very vigilant about getting these doses as they are recommended, but we're still looking at the data and trying to understand how important is this next dose, when does it need to happen, and what kind of long-term benefit are we going to see? So we're still looking at the data, but it's great that these doses are going to be available. I think that is a very prudent thing to do, given that even if BA2, this Omicron subvariant, doesn't create a very large wave, this virus is going to continue to spread. When it spreads, it has opportunity to mutate, and we need to be ready for the next surge.
Yeah, and as the virus continues to evolve, continues to mutate, and perhaps additional subvariants could emerge, are we seeing a scenario that we're going to have to take booster shots the same way we take a flu shot every season?
I think it's very reasonable to expect that we'll need to have a regular shot, like a flu shot. And likely we're going to start to see these vaccines updated on an annual basis based on what we see circulating. So I think, right now we're seeing this, the vaccines prevent these most severe outcomes, but we really don't know how long that's going to hold out, and we don't know what variant is going to arise that really could evade the immune response that has been elicited by these vaccines to keep people out of the hospital and from dying. So we're going to have to watch it very closely and be ready to act, and everybody should anticipate sooner or later we'll need another dose.
And I got to ask you about the risk of reinfection. What if someone contracted a previous variant? Could they become reinfected with BA2?
Absolutely. We've seen people who've been infected with previous variants get reinfected with the Omicron variant. We've seen people who have been fully vaccinated and boosted get infected with the Omicron variant. The big question is if you've had Omicron, will you get reinfected with this BA2 subvariant? And the answer is it's possible. A Danish study recently in preprint, not yet peer-reviewed, has suggested that you can get reinfected from BA1 to BA2. Those reinfections are rare.
All right, Professor Anne Ramon, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for lending your expertise to our audience. Take care.
My pleasure.
You're watching CNN Newsroom, and up next, firefighters in the U.S. They want to help colleagues in Ukraine who also fight the flames. After the break, the Americans are collecting all sorts of equipment the Ukrainians might also need. We'll talk to guys at the firehouse that started it all.
We've been watching history unfold.
Are you ready for a new beginning?
Let's go deeper on this.
And it will have the kind of effect that will get us to a place of more civility instead of what we're seeing today.
Michelle, I want to get your thoughts in a little bit of time we have left as well, particularly about the chilling effect when you're looking at the impact on the lawyers who would be coming through, the judges who would coming through this process, and given what you do with those, working with those lawyers and judges. What's your thinking there?
Michael, I'm so glad that you asked this question because there's also a chilling effect amongst those who represent people who are defendants. The fact that she was asked over and over again questions related to a very narrow set of the jurisprudence that she's had reflects really poorly not only this on the Senate Judiciary Committee, but it is chilling. If you do want to go into public service, if you do want to go into public service representing individuals who've been charged by the state, suddenly now that comes under attack. And she would be the first person on the United States Supreme Court to have been a federal defender. And that is critically important. Our first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, protect people against of the state. That is why it is actually so important that we have public servants who work in criminal defense to be in our judiciary. The United States has more people incarcerated in it than any other country in the world. So it is terrific and perfect that she is poised to go onto the United States Supreme Court, and she will. I am confident of this.
Michelle Goodwin, Barbara McQuaid, and all for being with us tonight and your time. Before we go, folks, the redistricting disaster in Ohio that just won't end for Republicans.
Welcome to Allstate.
Watching TV. Number 4, observing animals. Is that a hobby? Let's go to the pet store. And 5, mathematics. So those are the most boring hobbies. Anything stand out there for you? Do you
I'll
do
tell
any
you
of them?
what stands out most for me is that you didn't mention me on this, because can I show you guys some text that Brian has actually sent me?
No.
For real? You know, we are text buddies. So the first text he sent me recently was, Murr, kill me here. Seriously, you're the most boring guy on the planet on TV.
I was in a bad mood that day.
Next text to him was, Murr, seriously, I can't read that. When you get a break from your incredibly boring life, text me back. The next one, he said, was, Murr, you're boring, and then I just wrote him back, finally.
It says, when you get a break from your incredibly boring life, text me back, Murr, you're boring.
And I wrote him back, just please stop. That, right. I always thought I was the most boring one.
Right, I just think that you're showing a side of me that I didn't want revealed. That's behind the scenes for a reason. Now, the most boring jobs for you, let's take a look. I don't even know what this looks like. Number 1, most boring job is data analyst. Number 2 is accounting. Sorry. Number 3, tax insurance. Number 4, cleaning, just general. Number 4, banking. And number 6, writer of middle-aged children's books. Is the 6th most boring job in the world, and that is you. How do you stay awake? Next.
Moving on to topic number 2.
City. In it, Sandra Bullock is a romance novelist kidnapped by a wealthy madman seeking the secrets of her novels. Channing Tatum and Brad Pitt are added into the mix, spoofing their own good looks and physiques. It's lighthearted, predictable fun. That's the kind of movie you don't think too hard about. You just let it happen. It's a Dean's List B in theaters only. Also new this week is the nail-biter Infinite Storm, the story of an experienced climber who discovers a mysterious stranded man on the mountain just as she's trying to get down off of it before a massive blizzard hits. Naomi Watts stars in this real-life nail-biter that's spectacularly shot and only in theaters, another Dean's List B. All in all, a good weekend to check out an Oscar-nominated movie or performance. My predictions for Sunday's Academy Awards include
With my arms open wide, I threw away my pride.
In Coda, Children of Deaf Adults, Troy Kotzer beautifully plays a fisherman struggling to relate to his daughter who is able to hear. In addition to it being a touching performance, Kotzer has won nearly every award along the awards trail this year. He's the easy favorite to become the first deaf actor to win the Supporting Actor Award. Just like Kotzer, Ariana DeBose has had a pretty great string of wins with all the major award shows this year. And just like Kotzer, she deserves to win with her touching yet fearless portrayal of Anita in this classic story. She has earned the Best Supporting Actress honors.
I just want to love people.
Jessica Chastain was determined to bring some humanity to the disgraced televangelist Tammy Faye Baker. I think that's what's behind her performance, one that will snag her first Academy Award after being nominated 2 other times. For her, the third time will be the charm.
I wrote me a 78-page plan for their whole career before they was even born.
Yeah, baby, yeah! The third time will also be the charm for Will Smith after being nominated for Oscars for his performances in Ali and Pursuit of Happiness. His performance in King Richard is powerful and uplifting, the perfect combination for Oscar Gold coming out of the pandemic, which is why I think that KOTA will wind up being this year's Best Picture winner. Aside from the movie being a well-made, insightful look into the world of people without hearing, it's also loving and uplifting. It has all the momentum of awards season this year.
You can always get my movie reviews and home video pics sent right to your phones every week just by texting the word Dean to 97999. I hope you have a great weekend. Dean Richards, News Nation, Chicago.
Coming up in our second hour of News Nation Prime, huddling underground. We'll speak with a Ukrainian mother sheltering with her 3 children in Kyiv while documenting her story on social media.
That donated, stitched on them.
Hopefully, someday, eventually, I'll find the pictures of the flag and the gear making to the front lines where they need it right now.
What do you want to say to the people who will wear this gear?
The people who wore the gear before you, just know that they stand behind you.
Alexander Field, CNN, Clifton, New Jersey.
I'm Christy Lou Stout in Hong Kong. We have more of our breaking news coverage live from Ukraine in a moment.
Stay tuned to get.
He was able to benefit. It wasn't just concentrated in one particular area.
One of the owners made Facebook threatening to ban all Native Americans from the hotel.
It was a huge insult towards the whole Sioux Nation.
Chuck Rizak wanted to bring this nostalgic experience back to Sioux Falls.
People come to Charlie's and they go straight to the Piranha Tank.
Breaking news doesn't take the weekend off.
That's why you'll find KELO News right here.
All morning.
And into the night.
And I'm here tracking the storms, working double time.
All the news on air.
And online.
All week.
It was as if someone had lowered a window shade and...
Yellowstone, home of the Great American Adventure, your year-round vacation destination. For more information, visit CodyYellowstone.org or call 1-800-393-CODY.
On Cool the Midwife.
I can't do it.
These families create a drain on finite resources.
No one has the right to decide who is worthy to be born.
It's so beautiful, baby girl.
Sunday at 7, 6 Mountain on SDPB TV.
मेरे लिए तो बहुत ही रिस्की है।
तो इन दमंग लोगों ने क्या किया, उसको पत्थर मारकर
मेरा दिल हौसला देता है।
Monday at 9, 8 Mountain on SDPB TV.
Life is full of choices, and right now your favorite member benefit, Passport, is offering more stream.
Welcome to the club.
It's a beautiful thing with cooking.
I keep wanting to smell it.
Travel.
And here we are.
Documentaries.
I realized.
And so much more. The choice is yours with on the PBS Video app.
On American Experience, a brutal murder in 1942.
The word went on in the neighborhood, they're picking up everybody. Somebody got killed.
A sensational trial.
It was plastered all over the papers.
A city erupts in violence.
You see these servicemen beating the heck out of all these Mexicans.
Los Angeles was like a war zone.
Zoot Suit Riots on American Experience.
Tuesday at 8, 7 Mountain on SDPB TV.
No doubt that we won and we won.
Frontline and ProPublica investigate how lies made their way to the center of American politics.
Misinformation that this group would create would find its way to Trump and kept playing a role in the White House's attempts to overturn the election.
And a growing political movement.
They feel like it's what they need to do to politically survive. But they are eating at the foundations of our democracy when they do that.
Tuesday at 9, 8 Mountain on SDPB TV.
The world is full of possibilities, and so is every child. As an SDPB corporate sponsor, you can ensure that kids are ready to learn by supporting shows that encourage curiosity. 85% of parents say that PBS Kids is a trusted, safe source for kids to watch TV. Help prepare today's children for tomorrow's challenges. Underwrite PBS Kids shows on SDPB.
SDPB. We are South Dakota.
This program is made possible in part by...
Live from NewsNation headquarters, this is NewsNation Prime.
Breaking news out of...
Go. The shockingly candid remark came at the very end of the president's speech in Warsaw. A Kremlin spokesperson ridiculed the comments.
With a fiery speech that raised more than a few eyebrows around the world. Before departing Poland on Saturday, Mr. Biden met with many of the Ukrainians who have fled their homeland in search of peace and safety. It's
countries from Warsaw, Poland, just hours ago. A message of solidarity pledged to Ukraine and its allies. His most direct warning yet for Russia and its president.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The president's words come after Russia appears to have scaled back its ground offensive targeting the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, while consolidating its hold on contested regions in the eastern part of the country, refuting assessments that the invasion has not gone to plan for Russia. Of course, that doesn't mean the offensive has abated entirely. Ukrainian officials reporting that the city of Lviv was hit by multiple rocket attacks today. Several people reported injured, a fuel storage facility in flames. Officials begging civilians to stay sheltered as explosions rock the city. We'll unpack the history that was made this week. The confirmation hearings of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and the attacks she endured from Republican senators. What did the attacks say to Black America? And can we expect a wider political impact? That's tonight on Politics Nation. And of course, we'll bring you the latest on this war from Warsaw to Washington over the next hour. We begin tonight in Ukraine. Joining me now is NBC's Ali Arouzi. He is in Lviv, Ukraine. Ali?
Good evening, Reverend. Well, at about 5.5, 6 hours ago, the air raid sirens went off in Lviv, and shortly after that, there were several loud explosions that all of us heard, followed by a dark plume of smoke rising over the city. That had obviously shaken up many of the residents of Lviv, many of the displaced people that have fled the eastern war-torn part of the country. Then at about 2 hours after that initial explosion, there was another explosion. It sounded smaller, but nonetheless, we heard that. That was also followed by black plumes of smoke, much smaller ones that went out far more quickly. We learned that the first attack was on a fuel depot. The location, the Ukrainians don't want us to discuss for security reasons, but it was a fuel depot within the outskirts of the city. It was hit by 2 missiles and was still burning when I came on air with you. Firefighters were at the scene trying to extinguish it.
But the overarching message, very clear, something the president wanted to hammer home before he left Europe, particularly given the moment where White House officials and European officials alike know there's no near-term end to the crisis that's torn apart Ukraine over the course of the last month. Phil Mattingly, CNN, Warsaw.